Another hearty laugh shook Van when he unearthed for entomologically minded ardor the following passage in a reliable history of mating habits. Quote, some of the perils and ridicule which attend the missionary position adopted for mating purposes by our puritanical intelligentsia and so justly derided by the primitive but healthy-minded natives of the Biguri Islands are pointed out by a prominent French Orientalist, thick footnote skipped here, who describes the mating habits of the fly Ceromia amarata pupart. Copulation takes place with both ventral surfaces pressed together and the mouths touching. When the last throb, frisson, of intercourse is terminated, the female sucks out the male's body content through the mouth of her impassioned partner. One supposes, see Pesson et al., another copious footnote, that the titbits, such as the juicy leg of a bug enveloped in a webby substance, or even a mere token, the frivolous dead end or subtle beginning of an evolutionary process, quilus sate, such as a petal carefully wrapped up and tied up with a frond of red fern, which certain male flies, but apparently not the Femerata and Amarata morons, bring to the female before mating, represent a prudent guarantee against the misplaced veracity of the young lady. Still more amusing was the message of a Canadian social worker, Madame de Rayon Ficini, who published her treatise on contraceptive devices in Kapuskin patois, to spare the blushes of Estonians and United Statians, while instructing hardier fellow workers in her special field. Quote, sole sura metoda, end of quote, she wrote, quote, por dissever natura est por un strong guy de continuo jusque le plaisir blems, et lors a l'ultima instanta sfitura a la ultra gropa groove. Ma perquae una fem ardora andor ponderosa ne se ritorna, kvic enough la transita e facilitata per positio toravago, end of quote. And that term and appended glossary explained in blunt English as, quote, the posture generally adopted in rural communities by all classes, beginning by the country gentry and ending with the lowliest farm animals throughout the United Americas, from Patagony to Gasp, end of quote. Ergo, concluded Van, our missionary goes up in smoke. Your vulgarity knows no bounds, said Ardor. Well, I prefer to burn than to be slurped up alive by the Cherami, or whatever you call her, and have my widow lay a lot of tiny green eggs on top of it. Paradoxically, quote, scient, end of quote, Ardor was bored by big learned works with woodcuts of organs, pictures of dismal medieval whorehouses, and photographs of this or that little Caesar in the process of being ripped out of the uterus, as performed by butchers and masked surgeons in ancient and modern times, whereas Van, who disliked, quote, natural history, end of quote, and fanatically denounced the existence of physical pain in all worlds, was infinitely fascinated by descriptions and depictions of harrowed human flesh. Otherwise, in more flowery fields, their tastes and titters proved to be much the same. They liked Rabelais and Casanova. They loathed Le Sieur Sade and Herr Massac and Heinrich Müller. English and French pornographic poetry, though now and then witty and instructive, sickened them in the long run, and its tendency, especially in France before the invasion, of having monks and nuns perform sexual feats, seemed to them as incomprehensible as it was depressing. The collection of Uncle Dan's Oriental erotica prints turned out to be artistically second-rate and inept calisthenically, In the most hilarious and expensive picture, a Mongolian woman with an inane oval face surmounted by a hideous hairdo was shown communicating sexually with 6 rather plump, blank-faced gymnasts in what looked like a display window jammed with screens, potted plants, silks, paper fans, and crockery. 3 of the males contorted in attitudes of intricate discomfort were using simultaneously 3 of the harlot's main orifices. 2 older clients were treated by her manually, and the 6th, a dwarf, had to be contented with her deformed foot. 6 other voluptuaries were sodomizing her immediate partners, and 1 more had got stuck in her armpit. Uncle Dan, having patiently disentangled all those limbs and belly folds directly or indirectly connected with the absolutely calm lady, still retaining somehow parts of her robes, had penciled a note that gave the price of the picture and identified it as, quote, geisha with 13 lovers, end of quote. Van located, however, a 15th navel thrown in by the generous artist, but impossible to account for anatomically. That library had provided a raised stage for the unforgettable scene of the burning barn. It had thrown open its glazed doors. It had promised a long idyll of bibliolatry. It might have become a chapter in one of the old novels on its own shelves. A touch of parody gave its theme the comic relief of life. Chapter 22. My sister, do you still recall the blue Lador and Artis Hall? Don't you remember any more that castle bathed by the Lador? Ma soeur te souvient il encore du château que baignait Lador? My sister, do you still recall the Lador-washed old castle wall? Sestra moya, ti pomnish goru, I dub visoki I Ladoru. My sister, you remember still the spreading oak tree and my hill? Oh, qui me rindra mon aline, et le grand chêne et ma colline. Oh, who will give me back my Jill and the big oak tree and my hill? Oh, qui me rindra mon Adèle, et ma montagne, et la hirondelle. Oh, qui me rendra ma Lucille, l'adore, et la hirondelle agile. Oh, who will render in our tongue the tender things he loved and sung? They went boating and swimming in Lador. They followed the bends of its adored river. They tried to find more rhymes to it. They walked up the hill to the black ruins of Bryant's Castle, with the swifts still flying around its tower. They traveled to Kaluga and drank the Kaluga waters and saw the family dentist. Van, flipping through a magazine, heard Ardor scream and say, "Chort, devil," in the next room, which he had never heard her do before. They had tea at a neighbor's, Countess Desprez, who tried to sell them unsuccessfully a lame horse. They visited the fair at Artisville, where they especially admired the Chinese tumblers, a German clown, and a sword-swallowing, hefty Circassian princess who started with a fruit knife, went on to a bejeweled dagger, and finally engulfed, string and all, a tremendous salami sausage. They made love, mostly in glens and gullies. To the average physiologist, the energy of those 2 youngsters might have seemed abnormal. Their craving for each other grew unbearable if within a few hours it was not satisfied several times, in sun or shade, on roof or in cellar, anywhere. Despite uncommon resources of ardor, young Van could hardly keep pace with his pale little amourette, local French slang. Their immoderate exploitation of physical joy amounted to madness and would have curtailed their young lives had not summer, which had appeared in prospect as a boundless flow of green glory and freedom, begun to hint hazily at possible failings and fadings, at the fatigue of its fugue, the last resort of nature, felicitous alliterations, when flowers and flies mime one another. The coming of a first pause in late August, a first silence in early September, the orchards and vineyards were particularly picturesque that year, and Ben Wright was fired after letting winds go free while driving Marina and Mademoiselle Riviere home from the Vendange Festival at Brantôme near Lador. Which reminds us, catalogued in the Artist Library under Exat Luber, was a sumptuous tome, known to Van through Miss Vertigrad's kind offices, entitled, quote, Forbidden Masterpieces, 100 paintings representing a private part of Nat Gal, printed for H.R.M. King Victor. This was beautifully photographed in color, the kind of voluptuous and tender stuff that Italian masters allowed themselves to produce in between too many pious resurrections during a too long and lusty Renaissance. The volume itself had been either lost or stolen or lay concealed in the attic among Uncle Ivan's effects, some of them pretty bizarre. Van could not recollect whose picture it was that he had in mind, but thought it might have been attributed to Michelangelo de Caravaggio in his youth. It was an oil on unframed canvas depicting two misbehaving nudes, boy and girl, in an ivied or vined grotto or near a small waterfall overhung with bronze-tinted and dark emerald leaves and great bunches of translucent grapes, the shadows and limpid reflections of fruit and foliage blending magically with veined flesh. Anyway, this may be purely a stylistic transition. He felt himself transferred into that forbidden masterpiece. One afternoon, when everybody had gone to Brantôme and Ardor and he were sunbathing on the brink of the cascade in the larch plantation of Artist Park, and his nymphette had bent over him in his detailed desire, her long straight hair that seemed of a uniform bluish black, in the shade now revealed, in the gem-like sun, strains of deep auburn alternating with dark amber and lanky strands, which clothed her hollowed cheek, or were gracefully cleft by her raised ivory shoulder. The texture, gloss, and odor of those brown silks had once inflamed his senses at the very beginning of that fatal summer, and continued to act upon him strongly and poignantly long after his young excitement had found in her other sources of incurable bliss. At 90, Van remembered his first fall from a horse with scarcely less breathlessness of thought than that first time she had bent over him and he had possessed her hair. It tickled his legs. It crept into his crotch. It spread all over his palpitating belly. Through it, the student of art could see the summit of the Trompe-l'Oeil school, monumental, multicolored, jutting out of a dark background, molded in profile by a concentration of Caravaggesque light. She fondled him. She entwined him. Thus a tendril climber coils round a column, swathing it tighter and tighter, biting into its neck ever sweeter, then dissolving strength in deep crimson softness. There was a crescent eaten out of a vine leaf by a sphingid larva. There was a well-known microlepidopterist who, having run out of Latin and Greek names, created such nomenclatorial items as Merichism, Atticism, Oakism. She did. Whose brush was it now? A titilant Titian? A drunken Palma Vecchio? No, she was anything but a Venetian blonde. Doso Dosi, perhaps. Faun exhausted by nymph. Swooning satyr. Doesn't that new-filled molar hurt your own tongue? It bruised me. I'm joking. My circus Circassian. A moment later, the Dutch took over. Girl stepping into a pool under the little cascade to wash her tresses, and accompanying the immemorial gesture of wringing them out by making wringing out mouths immemorial too. My sister, do you recollect that Tourette of the Moor, yclept? My sister, do you still recall the castle, the Lador, and all?